This is Lou Agosta, and I'm joined today for a conversation, Reclaiming Empathy in Video Conversation, an imaginary dialogue with Sherry Turkle. Today, I'm having a conversation with my colleague and friend, Arnon Rolnick, PhD psychology. I will let him introduce himself. Just one thought up front: his commitment is to integrating biofeedback, psychology, and technology. He says, and I believe it is accurate and true, that he is incapable of being indifference. His exuberance, enthusiasm, commitment, and empathy are an inspiration to me, and I believe will be one to the listening, viewing audience. Arnon, great to see you.
Great to see you, and thank you for such a nice introduction. So I want to share with you my almost 30 years of effort to integrate psychotherapy, psychology, and technology. And as a clinical psychologist, I've been baffled by the paradox that characterize life in the 21st century. On one hand, technology and science are providing us with better way to live. Yet, on the other hand, people are suffering more due to the same technology. It is as though technology helped us to neglect ourselves. And before I will say a few words about my work in this area, I want to say why Sherry Turkle is so important to me. She was a pioneer and a guru.
A pioneer and a guru.
Yes, yes.
Got that.
Yeah, so I will say a few words about why she's a pioneer and guru, and then I will say a few words about my work, and then the issue of empathy will lead us all the way. So it was her book, The Second Self, where she defines computer as more than just a tool, but part of our everyday personal and psychological life. She looks at how the computer affects the way we look on ourselves and our relationship with others. She's claiming that technology defines the way we think and act. Turkle's book, which was really the first one in this area, in this period, allowed us to view and reevaluate our own relationship with technology. This was her first book, and this was the first moment that I thought, wow, it's interesting. And then came my own work, which as a psychologist, I felt that there is some gap between what happens in the meeting, and then the patient is going home and he either forgets or doesn't do what we decided he will do. So I thought we would like to do what in CBT they call homework. I don't like the name homework, but usually—
Just for our audience, CBT, most people know cognitive behavioral therapy. And assignments, there are assignments, as you said. Back to you.
Yeah, I would even appreciate it, Lou, if you will, if sometimes I'm not clear, either I'm using terms or my English is not so clear, you will help the audience to understand my accent. So it was sometime earlier in 1995, see how old am I, that since I worked with biofeedback, I thought, why don't give the patient not only a biofeedback, but a CD that he can work at home. And we call it de-stress. And we sold it in Boots, you know, the British pharmacy. And I thought that should be the killer. That should be the most important thing psychologists give to the world. And apparently it didn't work.
Well, you send the patient home with a CD. Yes. And there's interactive media here. So already we're in the online digital world. And the patient or the client or the individual struggling. So what happens? They still are not that engaged. What's the takeaway here?
Well,
yeah, what do you think?
I would explain it a little bit later when I speak about beating the blues. Then the company, a British company, hired me to help them develop already an internet. No, it was the first CD and then internet program of cognitive behavioral therapy that will help the patient overcome depression and anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
I thought again that it would be a wonderful idea that after seeing a patient, he will use this CD. The company thought differently. She said, we don't need a therapist. Just we'll give them this program, eight 45-minute sessions, and they will be cured.
Yes. So now, you become indispensable. You have, we think maybe this is not going to work exactly as the British UK publishing company is imagining, but at some point, if once the therapist, the psychotherapist has designed the assignments, we no longer need you. Keep in touch, sir. Have a great life. And so what happened?
Well, what happened is very interesting. From one hand, there were about 8 good studies that show that it works. Mm. And I felt strange. It was a good program. I was part of it, but could it really replace the human element?
Yeah.
Later on, it was found that the picture is more complicated. It works well only when there was a nurse involved there and she helped them to do the program.
So the nurse, let me just interrupt you here. It sounds like the human element. So you're already dealing with the human element and the technological element, whether it's a CD or whether it goes fully online in the cloud as we have it today. And it turns out, okay, so we have the psychotherapist step aside, and then what turns out perhaps to be the replacement therapist, but we're just calling him or her a nurse, shows up, and we suspect the human touch, the therapeutic alliance, if you will, the rapport between human beings may be a hidden common factor.
Exactly.
How am I doing?
But that will allow me later, after you will introduce your work, it will help me to divide the psychotherapy to 2 main camps. The technique camps and the relationship camp. And I will talk about it only after you will tell us about your work about empathy.
So that sounds like a good segue for me to say something about empathy. And we're gonna, so hold that thought. There's the relationship camp and as you say, the technique, the tips and techniques in psychology camp. And so hold that thought. So back to me, thank you. I appreciate the shout outs. Who the heck am I anyway? My one claim to fame, maybe more than one, but is to have authored 3 peer-reviewed books on empathy, starting with A Rumor of Empathy, in effect, a virtual volume 1 and 2, and then Empathy Lessons and Empathy in the Context of Philosophy, my PhD from the University of Chicago. In philosophy began with a dissertation on empathy and interpretation. So I'm not going to give the storied, complicated history of the distinction, empathy. At the time I was a graduate student, it's a matter of public record, my dissertation advisor, Stephen Toulmin, was being psychoanalyzed by the colleagues here in Chicago. I don't know the name of his analyst. He may have told me, but Heinz Kohut was innovating in the matter of empathy. And his colleagues, Michael Franz Bosch, Arnold Goldberg, Ernest S. Wolf, were innovating in the matter of self-psychology. And the question, is there anything to this concept, empathy, or is it just kumbaya stuff, not really? What's the intellectual provenance? And it made a great dissertation for a young graduate student. I would, it's something meaningful to engage. And so fast forward, I'm not going to tell you about all of these books. There's actually available on your local online bookseller for those who are curious. What I propose to do is provide, really, no kidding, the 1-minute empathy training. You can actually do it in a minute. Now, there are some conditions and qualifications, and so here it is. Drive out, get rid of, reduce, drive out things such as aggression, hostility, bullying, cynicism, resignation, bad language, politics in the pejorative negative sense. We are political and oftentimes it doesn't bring out the best. Drive those things out and empathy naturally comes forth. People are naturally empathic. People want to be empathic and will be so if given half a chance. So that's it. That's the training. Get rid of the negatives and empathy shows up in the space of relatedness. I pause for breath. I see you have a question, a comment.
Yes, of course. Being also trained in psychoanalysis, or partly in psychoanalysis, you clearly represent the Kohutian, the self-psychology view. People are good, but what about the Kleinian? How can we get rid of our aggression?
Well, thank you. Thank you. Human beings are naturally empathic. Human beings are also naturally aggressive. We are a complicated species. And I have no easy answer. The difficult answer is that oftentimes hostility and aggression are reactive. If you want to see somebody get angry, if you yourself get angry, if I find myself angry or even enraged, one good question to ask myself, yourself, the people in the listening or viewing audience, who hurt your feelings? Who perpetrated a dignity violation? Or where did you not get the empathy and respect you deserved? Because if you want to get a person angry, hurt their feelings, say something devaluing about their parents, it's not going to go well. If you say something bad, it's just not, it could get messy. And so I have we acknowledge the contribution of Melanie Klein, an incredible innovator. Let's talk to some children. Freud's innovating, he's got, Anna's innovating. They've got all these ideas about infantile childhood sexuality. Melanie Klein comes along, herself kind of a tortured genius in her own way, and says, well, let's talk to some children, see what they think. And play therapy is invented. What a breakthrough. So I don't know, there's a lot of room for disagreement here, but I also see some overlap in common ground. If you see hostility and aggression, there's a lot of things that can cause it. Some of it may indeed be innate and species specific. Nevertheless, who gets their feelings hurt and who has experienced an empathy breakdown, a dignity violation? I claim that's a candidate answer. And so I may continue, or you can, follow on.
I think I'm responsible for the slight digression. So
it's okay. So we acknowledge the digression, but a productive one. So yeah. I finished the 1-minute empathy training, and there's a lot more to be said about empathy. That's a fact. But we're not going to put it here right now. We'll come back to that. We're going to segue then, I think, usefully. I'm going to begin a conversation about the contribution of, I believe it would be Madam Professor Dr. Sherry Turkle, PhD in social psychology, MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. A personal anecdote, the occasion is, I'm going to wave the book here. Her memoir is published, The Empathy Diary. And there she is as a child of tender age in in the 1950s and the 1960s coming up on the residential part of Long Island. The grandparents are Holocaust survivors. They escaped Eastern Europe. Her mom marries a man named Mr. Zimmerman. Something immediately strange and unconventional comes out. He's performing certain kinds of, I should say, weird experiments that end up sounding like the work done by Mary Main and John Bowlby on attachment. He's leaving the kid, the young Sherry, the kid, forgive me, Professor Turkle, of tender age, all alone in her room and letting her cry her eyes out. This guy has got to go. The mom divorces Zimmerman and marries Milton Turkle, who has issues of her own, his own, but two other children come along, her younger siblings. And here's the empathic moment. Here's the moment of breakdown of empathy. At home, she's Sherry Turkle. At school, somehow, given this bureaucracy, she's Sherry Zimmerman. Now, in our time, this is 2021, about to be third quarter 2021, blended families. What's the issue? Brady Bunch, everybody's happy. No, this is the 1950s. It's somehow devaluing, stigmatizing. Divorce is, the feminist revolution is occurring, but divorce is still an issue. And in this community, not exact, I mean, it is a Jewish community, non-observant, living in genteel poverty, coming up in a kind of genteel poverty. Here's the problem. Sherry, you're not allowed to talk about it. You're not allowed to talk about the fact that your last name really is Turkle, but at school it's Zimmerman. Holy mackerel. It's a two-ton elephant in the room. And so here's my short review. This is a great memoir. It is in many ways a page turner. I was engaged, and I'll just say a little bit more about that. And it is also entitled The Empathy Diaries. It might be also entitled The Breakdown of Empathy Diaries, because it gives an account of what Sherry has to survive to reclaim her humanity. It goes well. She's smart. Her parents tell her, her grandparents tell her, look it, you're not going to typing class. This is amazing, right? This is the 1950s. Because if she learns how to type, she'll end up in the secretarial pool. No, Sherry, you're going to be in front of the class. You're going to be the teacher. They refuse to let her do housework. Read, they say. Read. This is good advice. I heard some similar things in my own kind of weird way coming up, not in a Jewish household, not in Long Island, but nevertheless, education. The takeaway is education is a way of improving one's life, of recapturing one's humanity, of getting some empathy. She goes to MIT. She goes back and forth for a while. She ends up at the University of Chicago about a couple of years before I was there. So it's a page turner for me, because there she is in Social Science 122, sitting in the classroom, Social Sci 122, and in comes Professor Bruno Bettelheim. He brings his straight back wooden chair, puts it on the low stage, and the students who are trying to speak truth to power give it to him. He gives it to him back. The author of so many books, Love Is Not Enough, The Empty Fortress, The Empty Fortress, The Empty Fortress, The Children of the Dream. Over to you for a digression. Yeah. Wait a second, your story, insert your story here. Yeah, he talks about, he goes and visits a kibbutz for a few months and says a few things which become controversial. So you grew up there. Tell me.
I was born in kibbutz, and I was raised in this unique type of experiment. It was experiment. They didn't know it's experiment. And you know what? We still don't know the result of the experiment. What I mean is that we developed in so many ways. Yeah. Many of us became leaders in various areas, but we also have some pain. And maybe each of us has pain in his own way. May I take the lead now? And
you got the conch shell.
Yeah, and I want to say that although Sherry began she was fascinated with computer, slowly she changed her ideas, and she speak about the problem that computers put into our life. For example, she has many books, but let's speak about two of them. In Alone Together, Turkle explored how technology is changing the way we communicate. In particular, she raised concerns about the way in which organic social interaction become degraded through constant exposure to illusory, meaningful exchange with artificial intelligence. I will speak about artificial intelligence later on. And in Reclaiming Conversation, which is the book just before the one you mentioned.
Reclaiming Conversation.
Right. Yes. She's arguing, she gathered, yes, exactly. She gathered data from school, companies, families, and she says that we forgot to speak with each other. We all the time doing it via devices. We type, we send SMS, but we don't talk. And that led her to the interview that we will talk later on, where she kind of arguing, and you will maybe express it better, that online therapy is something completely different from psychoanalysis. Yeah. And we will talk about it, but let me come back to this distinction between the two camps, and I will try to explain how the internet, when it entered into the psychotherapy world, how it affected the two camps in different ways. So let's begin. So what are the two camps? I say the technique camps and the relationship camp. And everybody who knows psychotherapy, you know that there is the group, I think both of us are part of this group, who thinks that the relationship with the therapist is very important, A, in understanding the problems of the patient, and B, in maybe curing this. The idea is that early relationship with the parental figure is very important, and this might be reflected later on in the relationship with the therapist. So that camp is clearly might be worried or interested about how does online therapy works. It seems that you want to comment, or shall I continue?
Well, I have some comments. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, so to speak, in that the book you referred to, Reclaiming Conversation, Turkle, Professor Turkle, Sherry launches a Jeremiad. She is on a tear. You know, remember the prophet Jeremiah in the Hebrew Bible? He was angry about something. We were talking about anger, and it's not clear whose feelings got hurt, but the feelings of the people at the dinner table, where dinner conversation and conversations between friends are interrupted by beeping, buzzing, alerting, smartphones. She is on a rant that we have got what amounts to acquired attention deficit. It's not like we were born with ADD or ADHD, and amphetamine-based interventions will not help. Because it is acquired through the number of interruptions that are. So she's, you know, that's the immediate trigger, if you will, which I believe you're expressing. What I would say is you're then tracing the conversation in the direction of online therapy. Because, I mean, it's now, you know, we're emerging from this pandemic, the positivity rate here in Chicago.
Hopefully, there is again some
fingers crossed. I mean, right. You know, we're jinxed now, I said, you know, but let us not do magical thinking. The positivity rate in Chicago last week was 0.6%. And I had said the pandemic is at least temporarily over when it hits 0.5%, but on other places it's 6% and 10%. It's really, the struggle continues. And there's a conversation about technology there, which we're really not going to go into. But, so technology it can be used for great good, and there can be big issues with it also. So that's the point I wanted to make. She launches the Jeremiad. Back over to you.
Yeah. So we spoke about the relationship camp, and I will speak about how it reacted to the internet. But I mentioned the technique camps. The technique camps is this camp who believe that what changes people's behavior, thoughts, and emotion is we should give them technique. It could be either cognitive behavioral technique, it could be emotion-focused therapy techniques, and many type of techniques, hypnotic technique.
You're not anxious or depressed. You just lack skill. Now, that's an enormous oversimplification, but there may be some useful techniques that can be improve and manage one's anxiety and or depression in a downward direction.
Yes, and I should admit that part of my research has dealt with these CBT techniques, and so I'm not in any way against it, but against this dichotomy. Now, what happened when the internet entered the picture? The technique camp said what this Beating the Blues, this British company said, we don't need a therapist.
Beating the Blues. I've got the name of the British company, Beating the Blues. Okay, we give them a shout out if they still exist. Beating the Blues. It still sounds good.
And but there is today 10,000 applications or programs that try to do what Beating the Blues did. And it's amazing how people are naive enough to think that they can help people or be helped by using online applications.
Yeah.
Now, just at the beginning of June, there is a big article in the New York Times about an application called something WeBot or something like that. And it says that this application is working so well that one cannot differentiate if the bot, this machine, is a human being behind it, or in fact, they are using some engines like Google is doing now. Google has developed Meena, M-E-E-N-A. It's a machine or a computer that
a system of hardware, software stuff.
Yeah,
Meena.
That passed the tutor test.
The Turing test, right?
Turing, exactly.
The Turing, Alan, can I tell the difference between, in a conversational exchange, between someone supposedly hidden in a room or a machine or a device, the Turing test? Exactly. And it turns out we think natural language has fallen to technology, that we now have technologies that can simulate a conversation with another human being. The debate continues.
The debate continues, and it's interesting to note that Sherry Turkle was married to one of the group who developed ELIZA. ELIZA is another very early program that used Rogerian concept to try to imitate psychotherapy. Of course, this was by far more simple. But let's go back to, so the technique camps, and there is a lot of effort to get rid of the psychologist and do what Sherry Turkle says, the robotic moment. She has a very strong anxiety, or she is afraid that this artificial intelligence idea is making the how can I say, it's dangerous to our humankind and
our humanity. Yes.
Humanity. Yeah. So I spoke about the technique camps and their mistaken direction, and I agree with Sherry. she speaks a lot about the dangers in this robotic idea, and she has, but my chair almost fell. But let's see what happened.
If you disappear off camera, we will await your return. And so maybe I can pick up the thread usefully at this point, and a segue to the immediate occasion where you called me a few weeks ago and said, hey, let us have a conversation about her concerns, objections, even, I mean, she's got some energy for this matter. She publishes, I'm going to quote the publication that catalyzed our back and forth conversation, Afterward, in, well, here's the title, Afterward, Reclaiming Psychoanalysis, Sherry Turkle in conversation with the editors of Psychoanalytic Perspectives, Volume 14, 2017. So in this one, she raises a lot, in this article, and with the editors, she raises a number of serious objections about the very possibility of performing online therapy. And she makes the case for co-presence. So what I want to say at this point is that
we had some problems. We don't know where was it. I don't hear you. You're on mute. You're on mute. Mute.
So
can we use this moment? I don't know what exactly happened.
We're going to clip it. We're going to clip it. So I'm just going to pick it up. I'm going to pick it up at Afterward, Reclaiming Psychoanalysis, Sherry Turkle in conversation with the editors of Psychoanalytic Perspectives. You were frozen.
You were frozen also. Let's see what we can do.
Things like this happen. Things like this happen.
And it happens in online conversation, in online therapy. Well, and the question, just a moment, and the question would be how the therapist and the patient react to this. One could be completely angry, the patient, or the therapist could be, I'm not doing psychotherapy online anymore, or we could use it.
I mean, you might reboot the router too, for that matter. That could make a difference. All right, so 3, 2, 1. The name of the article in Psychoanalytic Perspectives, Volume 14, year 2017. Afterward, Reclaiming Psychoanalysis, Sherry Turkle in conversation with the editors of Psychoanalytic Perspectives. And in this, I must say, this was 2017. I listened before the pandemic, then she denounces, I would say it's not too strong a word, she speaks in a devaluing way about online therapy and considers that psychoanalysis is missing the opportunity to emphasize the co-presence, the being together in the physical space, and all of the issues that occur there, which I will shortly enumerate. What I really want to emphasize here is that there are at least 3 objections that she has. And she says, look at online, to make eye contact with another person, you have to look at the green dot. I'm looking at the green dot and it looks like I'm looking directly at you. But when I look at Arnon's eyes, I'm actually looking away from the green dot. So it's not, sometimes if you take a step back, it's not entirely clear where a person is looking, but there's a kind of co-presence which is missing online. There's a lack of depth. She makes also the, I think, interesting, but perhaps questionable point. So I want to be an honest broker here and charitable. She makes the point, what starts out as being better than nothing key term, better than nothing. In a pandemic, you can't meet in person. So it is, she acknowledges in a podcast in July 2020, July, the height of the pandemic here in the States, she acknowledges you can't go to visit in person. It doesn't work. You can't, it's impossible. It's forbidden. And when we get back someday out of the pandemic, from which we are arguably emerging at this time, the problem is, she sees, is that there will be friction and resistance to meeting in person, where our fullest humanity, if you will, empathy in the sense of being present with another human being in the same physical space, embodied in a physical way. And so being better than nothing becomes better than everything, the best of all, in so many words. And finally, well, I mean, those are her 2 points. And she says psychoanalysis may be missing a great opportunity here to take a stand. And then she talks about a number of issues, including, but she doesn't say, you know, how to use the couch online. The couch, would lie back on the couch, free associate. I've seen people who lie back on the couch and immediately have a breakthrough. They think of things which they were aware of. They had not really been unaware of them, but were just kind of shoved back in their, you know, in their consciousness, in their inner sanctum. And all of a sudden they lie back and relax a little. And oh my God, I remember this or that about, not, you know, about parents, about friends, about current relationships that they had not been aware of. So it can be a powerful tool. How does that work online? It doesn't come up in this particular article. And so, please, I pause for breath.
The issue of, is that a real psychoanalysis? Is that the real, according to is the typical discussion in psychoanalysis for many years. And now when Sherry Turkle said, this is not psychoanalysis, when she speaks on online therapy, she is repleting, or she's doing what people beforehand did many years ago, when the question was being on the couch and not being in the couch. Not being in the couch or sitting front face to face, by the way, was considered not psychoanalysis.
Somehow it was not echt. It was not genuine or authentic enough.
Yes, that was not like the real classical Freudian and thing like that. Yeah. And also the question, should it be 5 times a week or 3 times a week? So psychoanalysis all the years is battled with, is it the real thing or is not the real thing? And in this way, I look on Sherry Turkle's concept, which partly can be understood, is as not, it's a little bit old psychoanalysis, but I think this is true and this is false. You know, in the 1950s, when there was the question, can we do psychoanalysis via the phone? Yeah. People said, listen, you can do it via the phone, but this is only supportive therapy. There was a lot of articles. So what I'm trying to say is that the relationship camp were very much obsessed with the question, is it the right thing? Is it as regular therapy or it's not as a regular therapy? And what I'm saying, it clearly different, but it might be very interestingly different. Maybe we can even find some advantages. Yeah. Maybe we can learn a little bit what works in psychotherapy. For example, now when we are talking to each other, is it the content? Is it my interpretation? Or is it my voice, my visual appearance, which might be even bigger than what you had seen if you were in a therapy room? You can see my face, my beard, my eyes and things like that. So, look, for example, I can do now this. I'm going backward and forward. Now,
amazing. Zoom in. We're literally zooming. I mean, so may I jump in at this point, because you raise a number of questions. I mean, this is now not Professor Turkle, Sherry, but Lou Agosta. We may usefully have a phenomenology of presence, of online presence, just as we have the philosopher Merleau-Ponty talking about embodiment, and a number of researchers. There is need for that, because the image is different than the physical presence. Sometimes it's just different. It's not better, it's not worse. It may be richer in some sense, and less dimensional in another sense. And so, you know, I mean, I could see she doesn't call for this, but she might usefully do so. And how does it differ? And the second idea, take a transcript of an in-person psychotherapy session and take a transcript of an online session. What's the delta? How could you tell? Now, if the internet blows up, as it did a moment ago in our then you know we're online. If the patient comes in and says, well, the traffic was horrible, then you know you're on the ground. But remove those deltas, remove those considerations. I suggest that in most cases, but the interesting ones may not be on that. In most cases, one could not tell the difference, because therapy is basically a conversation. It lives in language. So that's one. But what about those instances, new forms of Freudian slip? An anecdote, if I may. I met a new patient. I had a second meeting with the individual. He's on some version, she's on some version of Zoom. Gets up, the device is moving around the apartment, goes to the kitchen, goes to the oven, and says, pardon me, I've got something in the oven. I'm thinking, this is now would not be in the transcript. My thought would not be in the transcript. I'm thinking, okay, this is amazing. This is like practically an enactment, an acting out, a Freudian slip, and I share with them, do you perhaps, sometimes clients wonder whether their therapists know what they're doing. It's a valid question to be a little bit skeptical. The wise consumer of psychotherapy services, it assesses his or her therapist. Does this guy know what he's doing? And I said, so I'm thinking, it's a relatively new relationship. It's good to be skeptical. This is a smart person, smart consumer. But I do say, sometimes people are a little ambivalent about how they feel about do you perhaps think I'm half-baked? She's got something in the oven here, she's baking a cake. It's denied, but yet the thought is there. You get stuff like this. You can't make this stuff up. You can't make this up. And so that would be a delta. You get new forms of slips of the tongue, parapraxis, Fehlleistungen, and make no mistake, the transference is always the transference. And so, I could see does not come up in Professor Turkle's work, but might usefully do so. Because the genie is out of the bottle.
Yeah, Lou, I think the example you gave is wonderful, and being a more CBT-like therapist, I would not interpret it as half-baked or things like that, but I would say, wow, what a wonderful opportunity to see that you are working, that you have hobbies, that you can cook, whatever. You see, what I'm saying is the fact that the therapy is not now on our clinic, but in her room, in her place, help me know things about her. I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
So instead of fighting this and let's make the room exactly the same, let's use it.
Yeah.
Let's use this uniqueness that I can see their room and maybe they can see my room, which is again interesting.
It's significant. I would tend to agree. I claim that I was using it to explore the relationship, and it's true. My countertransference was like, one version of empathy is to be fully present with the other person. And I think Turkle, Sherry gets that. She doesn't actually define it that way, but I think she appreciates this matter of co-presence and really being with the, just like, if this dialogue between you and me Arnon, we go back a bunch of years. You know, if it were successful beyond all of our dreams, notwithstanding internet interruptions, we would succeed in making present a certain empathy. I mean, like, I get you, man. I know, you know, we've been struggling with these issues for a lot of years, and that's a criteria of success, that we bring it forth.
No
And
doubt.
we're doing it online. Hey, hello. we're having we couldn't do this on the ground. I mean, you're in Tel Aviv. We didn't put this at the start of the video, but you're in Tel Aviv. I'm in Chicago, Illinois. It would not be humanly possible otherwise.
Right, right. And that brings me again to my belief that we are reclaiming conversation. We are reclaiming conversation of internet dialogue, and I think it works very well. Let me tell you, I'm doing it for almost 20 years.
Yeah.
And I prefer still to have the patient in my clinic.
Yeah.
But I clearly suggest to our readers or audience not to go in either direction, not to say that technology will replace the human element. And on the other hand, let's use technology. May I just add one more thing, which I currently struggling with?
Yeah.
Remember my beginning that I want the therapy to continue not only by the 1 hour session.
Right.
So the question comes, can we use technology not only by doing the 1 hour session? Can the patient, I'm doing quite a lot of couple therapy, can the couple call me in the middle of a crisis?
Yeah.
You know, they're at home, and now, of
that
course,
would be powerful. That could be powerful.
Yeah.
At the moment, the enemy, so to speak, the issue is present, not the enemy, but the issue is present.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that's one use of to enlarge the ability of psychotherapy.
Yeah.
The other thing I'm doing is according to the technique camps, not to the relationship, I am using application, but the application is not trying to replace me, but trying to resonate our interaction. Suppose you are now my therapist and I was your patient.
Yeah.
You will use this resonator application to resonate. Remember, Arnon, how we felt when we had this problem, so the idea we can use technology in many other ways, not to fight it and not to say this is everything.
Yeah, well, technology, surely, I mean, this is a cliche, but perhaps hidden in plain view, can be a two-edged sword. Like any communication, it both connects and divides. And I mean, we are relatively inexperienced with online therapy. I said earlier, dropping in, the genie is out of the bottle. In her podcast in July 2020, at the height of the pandemic, Sherry expressed concern that there would be a lot of friction, as she said, to going back to in-person meeting, just as there apparently is a lot of friction to people going back to the office and to their cubicles in person. And in some cases it's essential, and in some cases it's definitely not required. And so how to tell the difference becomes the challenge. And it does seem like there is something, she makes the case, I mean, with which I must occasionally and in many ways align, that she makes the case that physical presence has something that is missing. And yet the genie is out of the bottle. We're not going, we're not going to get rid of our telephones. And if I want to send a message, I write you a letter, or, send a message with a boy. A runner, he would run and deliver, used to have, people would do that. I mean, we're not going to be able to go back. And so the challenge then becomes how to be authentic online and interact with a phenomenology of online presence, with new forms of, slips of the tongue, parapraxis, all of these kinds of enactments, which can become, I mean, in the world of online humor, I've been known to say occasionally to new clients, I mean, well, what about the digital divide? You need a computer and Zoom and a door that you can close for confidentiality and privacy. I've had clients, sadly, at the beginning of the pandemic who fell through the digital divide. This young man was living in the same bedroom with his younger brother. He was trying to do the conversation walking around outside. It was really hard. It was really kind of not working the way it should. And so there are people now where you may need to meet with them in person because they don't have the technology. And here in the States, it's a much bigger country, bold state, than Israel. And there's in some ways more poverty. There are parts of this country which are not digitally wired and connected. And so those issues become matters of social justice as well. And so I have to call them out. Sherry doesn't solve them either, but nevertheless, she lines up and makes the case that that's very important. So where I want to, maybe since I've got the conch shell here, I'll tie up two loose ends. I interrupted myself as I was talking about her memoir. After she ends up for a little while at the Committee on Social Thought and goes back to MIT, she ends up writing a dissertation on in effect, the social psychology of French political psychoanalysis. She meets Jacques Lacan. So all of the controversial figures, Professor Bettelheim, Jacques Lacan, the amazing thing, I really want to put this on the video. He treats her nicely. Yeah. Bad, I mean, why? You may say, well, this is so uncharacteristic. Why? Well, he wants her to write nice things about him. He wants her to produce a enriching, ennobling, even perhaps, given who he is, a flattering report. And she doesn't, of course, do that, but he does come to Boston to visit at Cambridge and to visit the colleagues. And the thing about Lacan, the only criticism of Lacan, the only problem with Lacan, there's only one problem: Jacques Lacan. He goes to dinner, he doesn't wear a tie, he throws a conniption fit. It's kind of an interpersonal disaster. Professor Sherry, not yet Professor Turkle, but Sherry has nothing to do with his bad behavior, but it resonates in different ways. She goes on to publish the book I was waving around, or I should say, in this version, Psychoanalytic Politics. You see the protesters of May 1968 and the Eiffel Tower there. She is not a Lacanist, but she is informed by the dynamics. The prohibition creates the desire. I didn't know I wanted to go online to do therapy until you told me I couldn't. Now, if I have to explain the joke, it's not fun. But that's the best I can do. So that wraps up her memoir. I mean, there's a lot more there, but that's some of the essential talking points. So I pause for breath.
It's okay. I think it's a nice, my chest still it's a nice way to finish with a more personal, may I use another personal? Sherry speaks so honestly about the Jewish home that she grew up in, and about her problematic father. And it's interestingly that she came to the same direction that I came, technology and psychology, although I have a wonderful father who believed in technology because he thought technology can help change the status of the Jewish people. It can help solve pandemic. It can help the human race. So my father really believed in technology, but not only in the technical aspect, but it's the part of the human spirit that we can fix things, we can overcome problems. So it could be different type of home that brings us to quite a similar interest.
That is remarkable, because here you are growing up in a kibbutz, which is kind of a collective environment, kind of the parents are not dismissed, but moved to the side. And here's Sherry, who gets an awful lot of attention. In some ways, it's almost impossible to get too much attention, but she does, and not of the right kind in some instances. And the end result is this complicated relationship with technology for the things that it is powerful in doing and for its disadvantages and drawbacks as well. So final thoughts here. We're coming up on the back end of our conversation. And, you know, in some ways, your personal anecdote is a final thought. 2 thumbs up on the work she's doing. We find that we take exception to the throwing online therapy and online psychoanalysis under the bus, as we say here in the States. The problem with that, here's my final reflection. The problem with that is it's getting crowded under the bus. There's a lot of people under the bus struggling. And so we want to make productive, useful application of all of the means to combat human suffering. What all of these different modalities have in common, whether it's CBT or biofeedback or group therapy or traditional dynamic therapy, rigorous Freudian therapy, self-psychology, they're not exactly the same. All of these are a commitment and a stand against human suffering, of which is significant and ongoing. That's so I think Sherry stands with that. I think we have common ground there.
Yeah, maybe she would join us in the next.
Well, would you like to make an invitation? Make the formal invitation, because was kind of occurred at the start of the conversation.
Well, you probably would say it in a more American, polite way, but I would say, Sherry, I was trying to communicate with you. She knows it. I wrote to her earlier because we wrote a book we didn't mention it till now. We wrote a book about online therapy. It was with Chaim Weinberg, and Lou has a chapter there. And then I wanted to have her in the book.
I see.
But it was before she wrote the empathic diary, or
the empathy diaries.
Yeah. And she wrote to me, "I'm so much into it, I cannot stop." And I pushed again. Being Israeli, I pushed. Yeah. And she said, "I appreciate it, but no." Okay. So maybe now she will be more available.
Well, there's an invitation for further conversation. The thing, and we acknowledge your empathy, Professor Turkle, Sherry. I acknowledge your empathy, my colleague and friend Arnon Rolnick. I acknowledge the empathy of the listeners to this conversation, because your listening creates the empathy in this conversation, in this space. So we honor and thank and acknowledge you for that.
Thank you very much, Lou.
Signing off.